You are locked in a stone cell beneath the greatest arena ever built. Above you, 50,000 Romans scream themselves hoarse while men and animals die for their amusement. Down here, you don't see their faces. You hear only their roar, the rumble of drums, the thud of bodies hitting sand. The light that reaches you is thin and dirty, leaking through cracks in the floorboards of the empire's favorite theater. This is how Rome trains you to think about cruelty. Something that happens out there, in the open, on the sand, where blood and spectacle are the point. But tonight, the sound changes. The cheering fades. The trumpets blow one last note. The crowd begins to leave. Up there, people are stretching, yawning, talking about dinner. Down here, another door opens. You're pulled from the cell and marched not toward the arena, but in the opposite direction, into a tunnel that slopes upward, away from the smell of beasts and sweat. The air gets cooler. The stone under your bare feet changes from rough to smooth. The torchlight grows steadier, more golden. You can feel it before you see it. You are leaving the world of public death and entering the world Rome never meant you to witness. When your eyes adjust, the tunnel ends in a doorway framed by polished marble. Beyond it lies the thing tourists photograph today and historians romanticize. The imperial palace on the Palatine Hill. Inside, everything is wrong for a place attached to so much violence. The floor is a mirror of veined stone. Frescoes bloom on the walls in impossible colors, deep reds, sea greens, gods lounging in painted gardens. Perfume hangs in the air where blood should be. You hear laughter echoing down a distant hall, the fading clink of cups from a banquet that just ended. Somewhere, an emperor is wiping wine from his lips and pretending he rules through law and reason. Here, in this gilded maze behind his public rooms, you discover the lie. A servant leads you down a side corridor that bends away from the light. The frescoes stop. The floor loses its shine. The walls narrow just enough to feel it. You pass doors that are never mentioned in official inscriptions, never appear on elegant floor plans. From behind one, a sound leaks out that doesn't belong in a palace. A strangled cry, cut short, followed by the muffled command of a man who knows no one will ever question him. This is Rome's other arena. No cheering crowds, no inscriptions listing the day's program, no carved reliefs of heroes and victories. Just a sequence of hidden rooms where the emperor's anger goes when it's too personal for the games. Here, law stops at the threshold. Witnesses are carefully chosen or deliberately eliminated. And yet, traces of these rooms and what happened in them keep surfacing, scattered in the writings of frightened historians, in odd architectural details behind throne rooms, in the way every empire that followed quietly copied this blueprint. What you're about to see isn't rumor tacked onto marble legends for shock value. It's a pattern of power, of fear, of what men do when they are told they are gods. And walls will keep their secrets. By the time we walk you back out of these corridors, palace intrigue will no longer sound like gossip. It will sound like what it truly was. A polite phrase for state-sponsored torment carried out just beyond the edge of the torchlight. In Rome, the law is supposed to be everything. You see it carved into bronze tablets, quoted in speeches, invoked in trials. Senators love to pretend that the Republic never really died, that the emperor is just first among equals, a citizen like any other with a fancier seat. That's the illusion. The reality is simpler and far more dangerous. The law is whatever the man in the purple cloak says it is tonight. Officially, the emperor is the guardian of justice. Unofficially, he stands above it. The Romans even had a word that made this arrangement feel noble: majestas, offenses against the majesty of the state. At first, it meant betraying the army, conspiring with enemies, plotting open rebellion. But once one man becomes the state, once his face is stamped on coins and his birthday is a holiday, majestas become a bottomless pit. Insult the emperor? Treason. Fail to show the proper enthusiasm at his performance? Treason. Laugh at the wrong joke at dinner. That could be treason too, if someone wanted it to be. You can feel the air in the palace change under this kind of law. Banquets are no longer social events. They are surveillance operations with appetizers. Every sentence is a test. Every silence is a test. The emperor makes a pun about an old general's cowardice, and you have half a heartbeat to decide how loudly to laugh. Too soft and you're disloyal. Too loud and you're mocking. A raised eyebrow from the wrong person at the wrong moment can mean that tomorrow a clerk will write your name at the top of a wax tablet labeled Inquiry. And in Rome, a secret investigation doesn't mean careful paperwork and due process. It means the Praetorian Guard. On paper, the Praetorians are elite bodyguards, the emperor's personal army. They stand at the gates, line the processions, glitter in polished armor during public ceremonies. But their real power lives in the corridors you just walked through. The unmarked doors, the basement stairs, the rooms whose existence is never discussed in the Senate. They are both shields and weapons. They protect the emperor from daggers. They also put daggers in other people, then write suicide in the report. Once a man is treated as a living god, anything done in his name can be called justice. Tiberius broods on Capri, sending calm letters back to Rome that end in lists of people who need questioning. Caligula turns part of his palace into a private theater where the audience participation is lethal. Domitian stalks the halls at night with a knife, rehearsing suspicion until it feels like prophecy. None of them invent cruelty. They just discover what happens when you give cruelty, unlimited resources, and complete deniability. Every empire has laws. Rome had something worse. A system that let one man decide when the law stopped applying. That system is what built those rooms behind the marble. To understand what happened in them, you have to understand this first. When the emperor wanted someone broken, there was no such thing as illegal. There was only unrecorded. The emperor's favorite shows don't happen in the Colosseum. They happen after dessert. You're at a banquet, reclining on a couch under painted ceilings while slaves pour wine that tastes like flowers and metal. The emperor has been performing again, reciting poetry, playing the lyre, maybe even singing a tragic role while everyone pretends not to wince. You feel the room hold its breath when he finishes. There is a beat of silence, just a fraction too long. Then someone, halfway down the table, makes the mistake of living honestly. A muttered joke, an eye roll, a smile that doesn't rise all the way to the eyes. You see it land, not on the emperor directly, but on the man behind his chair, a freedman with a face like a closed door. He doesn't react, he just notes it. Later, when the torches burn lower and the guests begin to leave, that same freedman brushes past the offender with a soft, almost apologetic, "The emperor would like a word." It sounds like an honor. It isn't. The public rooms of the palace go quiet as the last musicians pack up. Somewhere a fountain keeps whispering to itself. You are led down a narrower corridor where the marble floor gives way to plain stone. Tapestries appear on the walls, not for decoration, but insulation. You know this because as you walk past one, you hear something you're not supposed to. A single, muffled scream, strangled by fabric and distance. Inside, the private theater is already arranged. Not with seats and stage, but with chains and benches and a chair you instinctively understand you're not meant to sit in. Imperial scribes stand in the corner, wax tablets ready, styluses poised. A professional torturer, an anonymous man with scarred hands, checks the straps on a frame that was once used only in public prisons. Now it's here, under gilded ceilings, because the emperor has discovered that the same tools which extract confessions from thieves also work beautifully on senators and lovers. A man who once argued policy in the Senate is stripped and bound like a runaway slave. A woman who used to share the emperor's bed is forced to her knees on cold stone because someone whispered she now prefers another. Methods once reserved for the condemned Flogging until bone shows white, fire applied not to kill, but to persuade, dislocation measured in careful increments, are repurposed as instruments of control for anyone who offends the guard in the purple cloak. Occasionally, the cruelty leaks back into the dinner. One emperor orders a guest to be beaten in the next room and insists the door stay open so that each course of the meal is accompanied by new sounds. Another decrees that anyone who laughs at the wrong time will be given a private performance afterward, their body providing the percussion. There is talk, in frightened whispers, of a particular device favored by one ruler, a table of polished wood and iron clamps, engineered to stretch without quite tearing, nicknamed with a sick little joke after his childhood pet. You'll see that room later. For now, you only hear its echoes, the clink of chains settling, a breath sucked in before the first blow, and the soft, efficient scratch of a stylus as someone in the corner records a confession the emperor has already decided you're going to give. Power like this doesn't run on marble and fear alone. It needs people. It needs a whole invisible workforce whose job is to make sure the screams never reach the street and the blood never stains the emperor's conscience in daylight. The first faces you see are the Praetorians. In public, they're statues brought to life. Plumed helmets, polished armor, expressionless eyes scanning the crowd. When they stand behind the emperor's chair, they look like protection. When they appear beside your couch at midnight with polite, empty smiles, they are something else entirely. The emperor requests your presence, they say, as if they're inviting you to a second dessert. They walk half a step behind you, close enough that you can feel the weight of their hands, trained for violence but resting lightly for now. In the corridor, their boots sound like a verdict. Then there are the people you're not supposed to notice at all. The imperial slaves and freedmen who move through the palace like ghosts. One scrubs the same patch of marble every morning, just outside a door with no official purpose, hands red from lye and something else. Another carries buckets that are never seen during the day and locks them away in a room that doesn't appear on any inventory. Their loyalty isn't sentimental, it's structural. A slave who knows too much about what he cleans is a slave who will never be freed. Behind them stand the specialists. Rome likes to imagine itself as noble and rational, but it keeps a quiet class of men whose entire expertise is pain. Some are doctors trained in anatomy, summoned not to heal but to calibrate. They know exactly where to place a blow so that bones crack without killing, how to burn skin in layers so the victim stays conscious. Others are craftsmen with a different sort of talent, engineers who look at ordinary tools, a rack, a chair, a set of manacles, and see improvements. A new joint here, a pulley there, a hinge that allows the body to be bent a little further than nature intended. The methods themselves are old, scourging with weighted whips, burning with coals or heated plates, joints pulled slowly from their sockets, eyes and ears deprived of light and sound until the mind begins to eat itself. In the arena, these things are done for spectacle. Behind palace walls, they are refined for precision. A man might be beaten where clothing will later hide the damage. Another might be suspended just long enough to feel his shoulders tear, then set down, bandaged, and sent limping back into public life as a warning only he can fully read. Some techniques are worse because they don't leave marks at all. Days without sleep in a room where the torch never goes out. Hours in absolute darkness with only distant, unexplained screams for company. Food withheld not to starve, but to soften the will. Words used like instruments, repeated questions that circle the same fear until it breaks. If an emperor can order anything, what does he ask these men to invent? Ancient writers hint at least one device so calculated that scholars still argue whether it could be real or if it was simply Rome trying to put a name to its own nightmares. We'll walk into that argument later. For now, it's enough to know the machinery existed, and it was never idle. It's one thing when the people dragged down those corridors are nameless prisoners, captured rebels, inconvenient witnesses. The mind can protect itself with distance. Those people foreigners, nobodies. The palace is built on the assumption that cruelty will flow outward. But in Rome, the longer an emperor rules, the more the circle tightens. Eventually, the palace starts eating its own. Tonight, the footsteps in the hall don't stop outside a servant's cell. They turn toward a room with painted ceilings and silk sheets. The woman inside is not a slave. She is, or was, the emperor's favorite. Her face has been stamped into coins, carved into marble, used as a symbol of Roman virtue in provinces she's never seen. Statues of her stand in the gardens, eyes cast down in stone modesty. When the Praetorians enter, she's half asleep, hair unpinned, surrounded by the soft debris of privilege. They don't kneel, they don't avert their eyes, they read a charge in flat voices. Adultery, disrespect, conspiracy, it doesn't really matter which. The destination is the same. She's marched down the corridor barefoot, the cold stone leaching the last of the warmth from her body. As she passes her own statues, the marble versions of her look away, frozen in the lie of safety. Every column, every torch she once glided past on her way to banquets now watches her descent like a row of silent witnesses who already know the verdict. The room she's taken to has no frescoes, no cushions, just chains, a bench, and a chair that is always empty until the emperor chooses otherwise. Beauty, which the court once praised in poems and toasts, becomes a target. Hands that used to adjust necklaces now tie knots, the same mouth that was kissed in public before cheering. Crowds is forced open to answer questions that aren't really questions at all. Sometimes the emperor is present, lounging in that empty chair while others do the work. Sometimes he's behind a curtain, close enough to hear the tone of every plea, far enough to pretend later that he didn't see how far it went. A physician stands by, not out of mercy, but to make sure she doesn't die too quickly. A scribe records each word, each broken denial, turning a private collapse into a document stamped confession. It doesn't stop with lovers. A nephew who once rode on the emperor's shoulders is accused of dreaming about the purple cloak. A sister whose sharp tongue amused him when he was young now gossips too freely. A childhood friend knows an old story, a drunk night, a clumsy joke that could embarrass a god. Each one takes the same walk past the same doors, understanding with every step that they are not exceptions. They are proof. Sometimes the torture isn't even aimed at the person in chains. An empress might be summoned to witness justice and find herself watching a brother pulled apart notch by notch until his loyalty snaps with his tendons. A trusted advisor might be forced to listen as his own slaves are questioned first, their pain used as leverage against his silence. The message is always the same. Love is a vulnerability. Attachment is a weapon. Anyone close enough to touch the emperor is close enough to be destroyed for effect. Later, in their careful histories, some Roman writers try to describe these nights. You can feel the ink tremble. They hedge their language, call the victims unfortunate, and the methods severe examinations, as if Latin itself is afraid to look straight at what happened. When you see who sat in those rooms, who screamed and begged and finally broke, you understand why. The horror wasn't just what was done. It was who it was done to, and how easily the man at the center could pretend it was all necessary. The walls of the palace were meant to be mute. No inscriptions, no official records, just corridors that began and ended in silence. But secrets never stay inside stone forever. They leak the way water does, through the smallest cracks, along hairline fractures, carried by people who have nothing left to lose. When you read the historians of Rome carefully, Suetonius, Tacitus, Cassius Dio, you can feel those leaks. These men wrote under emperors, or just after them, close enough to smell the fear still hanging over the city. They weren't rebels. They were insiders, or ex-insiders, men who understood that telling the truth outright was a good way to end up joining their subjects underground. So they wrapped what they knew in layers. Rumor, anecdote, they say, and It is reported that, but underneath the hedging, certain images keep repeating. One exiled senator describes being brought to a chamber where even the statues seem to look away. He doesn't linger on what happened there. He doesn't list methods or wounds. He simply notes that the marble faces had been deliberately turned toward the wall, as if even carved stone shouldn't witness what the emperor called justice. Suetonius, writing about a different reign, mentions in passing that certain rooms in the palace were kept shuttered lest their previous business disturb the guests. He never defines business. He doesn't have to. Another source hints at an emperor who liked to watch from a hidden peephole. Officially, he took no part in the examinations. Unofficially, a small aperture behind a painted panel allowed him to see every flinch and hear every plea, while an aide stood nearby taking notes on which questions produced the most satisfying reactions. Tacitus, careful as ever, only records that some victims seemed to know to whom they spoke, though he was unseen. A single sentence, but you can almost hear the breath on the other side of the wall. Then there are the bodies that made it back into the light. One writer records a man who was accused of conspiracy, questioned in secret, and later displayed in the forum as a warning. The crowd, used to blood in the arena, were reportedly shocked into silence at the sight. Another historian describes a woman carried out on a litter, veiled, her injuries so severe that even mentioning them on the page felt like a kind of complicity. The authors back away from detail right where your imagination starts to move forward. This is the pattern: approach, hint, retreat. They tell you just enough to make the outlines visible, then pull the curtain closed again. And if this is what they dared to put in ink, you have to ask yourself a simple question: what did they see or hear about that they decided was too dangerous or too monstrous to write down at all? You walk back through the corridor, in your mind, now, past the empty chair, past the chains that no longer hold anyone, past the walls that once shook with sounds no law court ever heard. It would be comforting to leave these rooms behind, to shut the door and tell yourself this was an aberration, the madness of a few bad men in a distant century. That's the story marble prefers: clean lines, noble inscriptions, emperors as flawed but fascinating characters in a costume drama. The rooms you've just seen do not fit on a postcard, but they weren't mistakes. They were part of the design. Every empire needs a place where power can act without witnesses. Rome simply built theirs close to the dining room. Those chambers beneath palaces and arenas weren't improvised. They were planned, funded, and maintained across multiple reigns. Emperors came and went, murdered, exiled, defied. Styles of hair and armor changed. Philosophies rose and fell. The rooms stayed. Guards were reassigned, torturers replaced, ledgers updated. The system survived the men who used it. Walk through modern Rome today and you'll hear guides talk about the Palatine Hill, the House of Augustus, the Palace of Domitian. They point out fragments of frescoes, foundations of reception halls, the outlines of gardens where aristocrats once strolled. Beneath and behind those ruins lie the spaces we've been talking about. Corridors that bent away from the light, thresholds that marked the line where law stopped and something else began. The devices are gone, melted down, or rotted away. The logic that created them is not. Because this isn't just a Roman story. If you sanitize Rome, if you talk only about aqueducts and roads and law codes, you also sanitize every empire that copied its pose. You make it easier to believe in power without consequences, in palaces without basements, in governments that somehow get to absolute control without ever needing a dark room and a closed door. The point of staring into these chambers isn't morbid curiosity. It's pattern recognition. Once you know to look for the corridor that bends away from the light, you start seeing it everywhere. In castles, in secret police headquarters, in black sites and undisclosed locations. Different languages, different uniforms, same architecture of secrecy. If this shattered the clean marble version of Rome you learned in school, Don't let that discomfort go to waste. Subscribe to Requiem of Thrones and tell me where in the world you're watching from, because this is only one palace, one set of walls. There are other empires, other rooms, other doors no tourist is meant to see, and we're going to open them.